Okay, here we are.
Here
Welcome.
we are.
Welcome to the official launch of Continuous Identity Sessions, where we're going to connect the brightest minds in identity with some strategies and real world approaches to make IAM work better. I'm your host and generally curious technology
You're also
security.
generously curious. Don't
I'm
sell yourself short.
generous as well as general. Dustin Avol. I am also director of market strategy and partnerships at Signal. And in these sessions, we're going to sit down with the people building, managing, dealing with identities at enterprises. Uh, the ones who figure out, like, how do we get through these issues? How do we reduce manual work? How do we automate? How do we actually improve business agility and security without being a burden to that business? And for those of you who are joining live, welcome. Thank you. Please use the Q&A panel. We'll try to tackle as many questions as we can towards the end of the show. And there will be a follow-up to everyone that we don't have time for today. If you subscribe, there will be follow-up emails as well. So let's get to today's topic. Since it's an introduction here, the launch, episode 1 on continuous identity. This is the continuous identity session. So let's figure out, what the heck is continuous identity? Where does it come from? And how do we even approach adopting it? So my guest here, who you see joining the screen with me, is Ian Glazer, Chief Customer and Strategy Officer at Signal. Hi, Ian.
Hey there.
A little bit of background on Ian, and correct me where I'm wrong, and jump in and cut me off if it makes sense.
Can I make up better stuff too? Is that an option?
I mean, it's pretty good, I think. So I don't know how much better we can get.
My mom likes
it. Ian has a long-standing career, very visible in the community, digital identity, seasoned product leader, has been a founder, an advisor, product exec, both at Weave Identity and Salesforce. And early in his career was a research VP in identity and privacy strategies at Gartner. So on the industry analyst side as well. But some of the work that I think is probably most evident in the community is as a board emeritus and co-founder of ID Pro, which is a professional association for digital identity management, as well as a board member and co-founder of the Digital Identity Advancement Foundation. He blogs, he speaks, he's front lines and speaking with customers, and has some sort of fascination with SOCs that we'll get into at some point. So Ian, thanks for being the first guest of Continuous Identity Sessions. How are you?
I love being the first one off the diving board. What can I say? Great to be here.
What have you been up to lately? I mean, there's been a lot going on in the industry. In where you been? Where are you from? Where are you calling from today?
Right. So today I am in a little town of Hinton, Virginia, just outside of Harrisonburg. If you've ever heard of James Madison University, I've got a place out here, and I'm actually in my newly outfitted office. I'm feeling good about that. But usually you can find me in DC, or more likely and more recently on an airplane. That seems to be the current vibe.
Have you been hitting up some of the events in the industry lately in the first half of the year? I know we had a couple of weeks ago, there was some
first half
activity in Vegas.
Yep. Was that Black Hat? This is my first year that I was not at Identiverse. I missed exactly one Identiverse, and I've now missed exactly one Cloud Identity Summit, which is the thing that became our Identiverse. So otherwise, European Identity Conference, places like that, but also just trying to, where opportunities arise, meet up with identity community around the world. So I had an opportunity a couple months ago to do that in London. I'm looking forward to doing it again next month. So yeah, just trying to be out and about.
It's great to have you here. I couldn't think of a better thought leader to have on the first episode of Continuous Identity Sessions. And before we get into continuous identity and what it is and what it means, maybe you could give the audience a quick sense of what you're doing now, your current role, what sort of identity challenges you're working with.
So, as you mentioned, I'm overseeing both customer sort of experience, that means delivery, training, support, all of those aspects of our business, as well as product strategy, as well as analyst relations and product marketing, and there's probably a couple others. But the cohesive aspect of this is there is a virtuous cycle between customers and strategy, and you can't have one without the other. So that sort of comes together underneath me, as well as the way we talk about what we do, how we talk about it internally, how we express relatively speaking, complex topics to one another, to the market, how our customers then take those messages and sort of talk amongst themselves in their own businesses about what can be, in some cases, feel like, again, really complicated things that end up being actually pretty simple when you sort of reframe them, and making sure that they are delighted in that journey and that they're delighted with the experience they get as they use our products. So that's sort of my remit. And the way I joke about what my role is I'm a lawn sprinkler. I sort of water different parts of the business, and I sort of rotate through the business. And as things are growing well, I can, sort of focus there. When things need more help, I can focus there. But, fundamentally, I'm a lawn sprinkler.
I can appreciate that. Put a little bit everywhere, sprinkle it out.
Yep.
I mean, speaking of that, like I mentioned in your intro, you've been a product executive and product manager and product strategist and builder and practitioner. However, there's also this other side of your career, if you will, that's really about building the identity community. You literally co-founded ID Pro and helping what you just said, like some of that communication to take place between folks in the community, maybe that are wanting to learn, maybe that have done it before. What sort of drives that? How did that get started, and why is that an important channel for you?
I think it's sort of two parts to that story. One of them is the personal desire I have to make future practitioners' journey through this industry easier than my own. Got to understand that come October, I'll have been in this industry for a shocking number of years, certainly shocking to me. And when I started, which was 25 years ago, there weren't the kinds of opportunities to connect like there are now. And so that meant learning this practice was hard. You often learned a very single product, and then maybe you learned a second product and you realize, oh, wait a minute, this is kind of part of the same domain. But the resources we had to learn about this more globally, let's say, our own experiences globally, was primarily blogs, and random website articles.
Message
I thought
boards.
there's got to be, what's that?
Message boards.
Yeah, also that. And maybe some text-driven things, maybe some IRC channels, But one of the things that started to occur to me was asking the question, how long did it take you as a practitioner to become productive as a practitioner, right? Like, how long did it, you come up to speed, if you will? And I started asking this question of customers and their organizations, like, hey, how long does it take you to train a new identity person for your team? I did this all around the world. And, I get answers like, well, it takes, if we're being honest, 18 months. Is that acceptable? Like, no, absolutely not. Like, it can't be, right? And this is back a while ago. And the other thing I asked was, what are the opportunities you have to give back to one another? And how aware are you of the community around you? And one of the really crystallized in my mind was I was in Germany. I was in Frankfurt visiting a customer and asked these questions. And we took some of these questions to a mailing list that we had around some of this and said, like, hey, if you could meet with one another, do you know of communities or meetups or what have you near you? And two people responded from the greater Frankfurt area and said, nope, nothing exists. And I know no one of my practitioners. I'm like, but you're kilometers apart. Like, this seems like a problem screaming out to be solved. So I started going around and asking people, like, do we think that it's a good idea if we could, I don't know, like, build a community where people could connect and maybe give back and learn from one another and have some vendor neutral training materials? Like, could we actually make this easier? And everyone's like, yeah, that's a good thing for you to do. And I was like, oh, I did volunteer for that, didn't I?
Yeah.
And that became like the early origin story of ID Pro, which is fundamentally two things. One, how do we make our practitioners' journey towards excellence faster and easier? And two, how do we afford people that have been doing this a while the opportunity to give back? Because I think fundamentally, no matter what industry you're in, no matter what walk of life you're in, you are looking for a way to contribute to something bigger than yourself. And I wanted to give an opportunity for that to happen inside of this industry.
Great. Yeah, I love that. I love the giving back and the full cycle. And in industry terms, I'm going to use this into a segue here and say, this is the type of thing, the community building, the education, all the connections that you were talking about. You can't just do it once, right? You don't do it once and then walk away and expect that it's done. It's this thing that has to be done repeatedly, or one might say continuously. So, so we're talking about continuous identity. Let's just dive right in.
Sure.
It's one of those terms that comes up occasionally, starting to be seen and heard more often, especially at industry events and in online and other places. And as per usual, it can mean different things to different people. So let's start with the basics. How do you define continuous identity?
Sure. I'm going to work my way towards that.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's start with a growing realization that we've been kind of doing the same thing for about 24 years in this industry. The practices that we have put in place are heavily, heavily influenced by the Enron scandal and resulting Sarbanes-Oxley legislation. So we've been doing a lot of the same kinds of things post-SOX. And the best way to think about how that works today is to think about our piano, which is not an obvious statement. Bear with me. Grand piano has 88 keys. Cool. Identity's piano has 5, and one of them is broken. Now, first, what are these keys? Well, these keys are an opportunity to apply an identity control. So, for example, create an account, add an entitlement, create a session, challenge for strong authentication. So sort of the things that identity systems can go do. Okay, so if each key maps to one of those, we have 5, one's broken. So those map to essentially join, right? The joiner, mover, lever functions. So those are 3 of the 4 working keys. And this is true, by the way, for both workforce and in more consumer citizen-facing systems. The moment that someone self-registers, that's an opportunity to apply identity control. When someone changes job roles or they buy a higher level of service from you, that's an opportunity to change the kinds of things you can do or they should be able to do. When an individual leaves the organization, when they close their account, like this too is a place where we can apply identity controls. Now, the 4th key is login or verify. That moment of like, hey, I want to know really to some degree of strength, this is the person they claim to be, and it's the same one we saw before. Now, we can also include in there when I issue them a token or when I issue an app on their behalf a token. So if we think about those 4 things, the number of times we, if you go with the analogy, get to press that key in a day, it's actually not that many. It's not that many opportunities, especially compared to our security peers, right? Our security controls, right? Their keyboard, they have a lot more keys and they can press them a lot more frequently. And that realization that the number of opportunities we have and the kinds of keys we can press is actually very limited. Now, it worked for a while, right? We certainly know how to do those things well, but it is comedically out of pace with both business and how it's expecting things to react, to be enabled for productivity, and to defend against adversaries moving, again, at a much faster pace. And so in some regards, when we start hearing organizations talk about continuous identity, when we start seeing this in the industry, really, I say it started around Identiverse this year, so back in June, and the momentum's been picking up. It's in some regards a generational reaction to how we used to do things or how we're currently doing things, but acknowledging, this is not going to take us another 25 years, right? We can't keep doing those same things. So long way around, if that sets up the context, if you will, for it, like continuous identity then is that reaction. Okay, well, what does that reaction look like? Fundamentally, it is about getting faster, respond to different kinds of signals more frequently and applying more controls. It is the opportunity to use more of that keyboard and press those keys more often. So let's start with that and let's see where that takes us.
Yeah, it reminds me of a blog that sort of introduced CAPE, Continuous Access Evaluation Protocol at the time. I think it's Profile now, that Atul Toshibaywali wrote, and it talked this term that I, as again, not as a technical person myself, but a term that I could really understand and get my arms around was fire and forget. This idea of you access and then it's done. You push that button to use your analogy, you push the key and then you're done. It's there's not
Right.
like
Right.
another. It's not okay. Let me go back and check, and then let me go check again. And how's everything still going? Excuse me. But rather that one time action. So
Well,
going
pick
down.
on let me pick up something there,
Yeah.
Dustin, because like you alluded to it there, which is the I sort of do a thing and it's isolated,
Hmm.
right? It's sort of an action in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And if we think about what organizations are increasingly expected to do, which is build a real zero trust architecture, that's antithetical. Like those two things don't play well, right? Zero trust architecture is saying absolutely never trust, always
Hmm.
verify. Is this the right access in this moment for these kinds of things? If we want to go towards that, if we're being required in some regards to go towards that, then we can't have a sort of batch oriented once every moment I have the opportunity to press a key, I can do it, but that's it. Like those things can't live together, right? So we need to be more continuous in terms of the ability to affect identity controls, to bring those to bear, not just at these major moments in the life cycle of an identity or throughout the sort of productivity journey of a user during the day, but more continuously to truly say, yeah, we never trust and we always verify.
It's a popular term now. Speaking of what we're seeing out there, what we're reading, what we're seeing smeared over materials, zero trust. There's other hot button terms, or maybe growing, I should say, in popularity, like real time or just in time, just JIT. Um, is that continuous identity? Is it not continuous identity? And is there a line that's drawn between these types of things?
Yeah. So here's what I would say aren't examples of continuous identity. First thing, anything that puts the human in the loop for either an approval function or some other manifestation of a control, right? Human in the loop type mother may I policies or controls is really a reflection of the way we did things post SOX. Why? Because SOX was very explicit. Like, you've got to demonstrate these controls and you've got to have essentially the fingerprints of someone on these controls. And so there's a lot of sort of workflow driven things that came out of that. Now, the other sort of side effect of why, or the reasoning why we would have a human in the loop, is that one of the classic things is you ask for access for something. And we as practitioners did not know really what the end result was supposed to be, right? Like, oh, I need access to this application. Not having enough data, not having enough context, we would kind of punt to a human to be like, I don't know, like, what do you think's the right thing to do here? And that became the model after, like, copy Ian's access so that Matt can have it. It became essentially the human in the loop to evaluate policy, whether that policy was formalized or not. So first thing that is an anti-pattern, if you will, for continuous identity is anything that's got human in the loop. The second thing is anything that primarily relies on standing access, especially highly privileged entitlements, that's an anti-pattern, right? The idea is that we can affect our controls more continuously than at the moment of need. Again, especially for highly privileged actions, systems, and entitlements, just have that need met in that moment with that access, and absolutely not before and absolutely not after, right? When work is done, review the access and don't leave it around. So anything that is using standing access. And there's a couple of ways this can masquerade. So for example, I may not have a session all the time in AWS, but you know how I get it? I just click the tile in Okta and boom, I get a highly privileged session. No matter what's happening, no matter the state of my machine or the business or anything, if I can click that tile and always get a highly privileged resource, that's effectively standing access. It just has a different path to get there. That's not something that we're looking to do here. And then the last thing is, the third of the three things I would say are anti-patterns around continuous identity are anything that's not using real-time signals. Now that, let me be very clear here. It would be great if everyone was using the shared signals framework, open standard, created in the OpenID Foundation, but it's also realistic. Like, we're in a transitional period, so there's plenty of proprietary signals that you can pick up on and take action on. Examples. If suddenly your endpoint detection and response system suddenly hates a user out of the blue, maybe we shouldn't keep all their entitlements assigned to them. Like, maybe we shouldn't remove those highly privileged things. Or like when we see that an individual is rolled off of an active duty roster, right? So they're off duty now. Maybe it's a DevOps engineer. Unless there's some other evidence, should we really allow them to create a privileged session in our AWS environment or GCP environment? Should we let them check in code to production right now? So these real-time signals can be used to inform much more expressive and much more useful policies. And if you're not using them, then that's really an example of sort of a previous way of doing things. Where again, we're waiting for the opportunity, like, ooh, I'm gonna press the key. Ooh, yeah, I press the move piano key. Yay! Like, we got to do something better, and signals are a path to do that.
Yeah, I've heard you mention context a couple times, and teaser, like maybe a future continuous identity session focused around some of these contextual signals, if you will. And I'm reminded of this phrase that I will butcher, but this idea that you never stand in the same river twice. The river might look the same, but things have changed, right? It's flowing water. Yep. And so you might go to click that chiclet on your dashboard, whether it's Okta or Entra or Ping or whatever your IDP might be, your single sign-on provider, and you still have the same account, but there could have been things that have changed in the background, and let's evaluate based on that.
One of the important things to realize, and honestly, I grew up as a user provisioning person in this industry. And user provisioning systems, IGA systems, are as smart as the things they can connect to. They know the world about those things, but that's not the whole world, right? And so one of the things that it took me a little while to realize the power of, and now I totally get it, is if I can reason larger than what my specific identity system can connect to, if I'm just aware of the world around me, I can do a lot more. I can make my existing investments a lot more valuable. So having a sense for like what's going on, that information is crucial to make decisions, but it has often been outside of the reach of our identity infrastructure, or where we've had it, it's been extraordinarily limited, like a point-to-point integration between vendor X and vendor Y, right? Oh, I can get ITSM ticket information, but only from Jira and not from Salesforce, right? Like that doesn't work in a large, complex enterprise. I need sort of ubiquitous sources of context that then I can reason against, and that's really, really powerful.
You've spoken and alluded to some of the tools and some of the approaches over the past 20 plus years. It's not that organizations have not been attempting to solve these problems. They continue to invest, I think, in technologies in order to govern, provision, some of the other things that you've mentioned. So I'm curious, what's driving this shift? And maybe more specifically, in your role at Signal, when you talk to customers, what might be the tipping point where they realize, oh, we've got a gap here, or we've got an issue that we need to address?
So I think inherently people can grasp the value that could be there. Like, man, if I could just spice up my SSO policy with the awareness of my EDR data, man, what would that do? That would allow me to maybe prevent future breaches. Why? Because I could say, look, if I see that your system has been is compromised in some regards, I really, really shouldn't be spawning up privileged sessions for you, right? I want to contain a blast radius. Similarly, that sort of realization of, man, just one other piece of information, duty roster information, what have you. Gosh, that's really powerful. Or that could be really powerful, but I couldn't find a way to connect it to what I already had. So sort of step one was like, wow, if I could just, yeah, like you take someone to a place and say, look, if you could add one more piece of information that maybe you're asking humans right now to evaluate, what if you could do that in a more automated fashion? Light bulbs turn on immediately. And it doesn't have to be super complicated. It's like, ooh, if I just knew if someone was on duty, wow, I could actually do a lot with that.
Sure.
So then the tipping point side of it is an example I'll go back to is a friend of mine in the industry, architect, was saying, look, I can't squeeze any more access out of our access certification process. I just can't, right? All I'm doing, if I'm being honest, is I'm burning a lot of FTE hours doing access certification. And I get it. There are regulatory interpretations of a requirement here, let's say. I certainly have an audit requirement around effective controls around who has access to what, especially for material systems. And this is sort of an expected control. But I got to do better, because waiting for an access cert to sort of clean up aisle 2 if I have an access spill, that's not particularly timely. That's a long window of exposure potentially. But with the tools I have today, I can't go any faster. And it's moments like that where people are like, okay, maybe it's time that we say we can't just keep drilling this same well different and expect some other liquid to come out of it.
I've seen, I've heard a lot of audiences, and maybe the virtual audience out there live and on demand is nodding and going, yeah, this makes sense. I mean, all these points are not sort of argumentative in folks sitting there and going like, no, that wouldn't work for me. But rather, I'm wondering if we get practical from continuous identity perspective, all those opportunities you just mentioned, where does somebody start? How does somebody get going?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, this isn't, on its surface, it's not contentious.
Right.
It's the like, oh, great. What you're telling me is I got to go blow all this stuff up that took me 10 years, 15 years to put in place. Like, that's a non-starter,
Yeah.
But I want this. How do I get it? Starting can be actually really, really simple. First and foremost is acknowledging and identifying, look, what one single spice, if you added it to this dish that you call your IAM infrastructure, would just make it better. You know, and some people say, you know, it's security related information, right? Like if I had EDR data, or if I had some threat intelligence data or IP intelligence data, that could really go a long way. For other people, it's business conditions, right? It's like, look, I have release windows and I don't want people pushing to mainline production inside these release windows, and we don't have great controls over that. And it may be sort of more business process related, which is, damn it, we have a change management process. Why the hell can't we tie our identity system to it to make sure that someone can't do something like work in production when we don't have a logged change ticket against it, right? So the first thing first is like that sort of realization. Now you can do that on pen and paper, right? This is a non-ones and zeros conversation. This is about how do I take the process that I want to put in place and actually identify the data to make it happen. Step one. Step two is then look for a great place to apply the control. For many people, that is, you know, for these kinds of systems, right, especially cloud native systems, they're pretty good about doing ephemeral access or just session-bound privilege. I've been using classic IGA tools, for example, to manage access there. And I've got hundreds, thousands of IAM roles that I seem to be statically assigning or time-based assigning, and I've got risk exposure because of it. And I have to do access cert because of it. What if I could lean into the native capabilities of the systems that I've already got and just better inform them? Like, what if, and oh, you know, my IDP knows how to do claims enrichment. What if I could tell my IDP, let it reason about this contextual information without changing a single thing from a user experience perspective, but let it know like, oh, hey, based on the fact that the individual is off duty, this is the IAM role I want them to inherit in AWS. That is a really small but meaningful step forward. Yes, it's relying on login as a key. I fully acknowledge that. But it's making it far more intelligent. It's making a far more rich decision that will go long ways to mitigating blast radius in case of misuse. And so it's the, hey, what one or two spices could really change this dish? What one or two pieces of information would really get me going? Two is, where's the most likely to be used control? Is it at the time of provisioning? Is it at the time of single sign-on? Do I have something that's continuously evaluating state so that maybe I can enforce some reactive controls when I see something change? And then just start super simple. Like, no one's got perfect data. No one's got even great data. People have like fine data, and that's just fine. Like embrace that. So like, cool, I now can bring this one piece of information into the story without changing my infrastructure dramatically, and certainly without replacing big ticket items. And I can get better. I can get better by reducing my need for access certification. I can get better by providing more ephemeral access. I can get better by minimizing my standing access. Those are really big wins to you as an identity practitioner, to see your security peers, and overall enterprise risk.
You are touching on some of the components in this framework, this 4 components framework that I think you've presented on in the past year or so. And by the way, for those watching live, we have some resources linked in the docs tab on the right of the screen. And this is one of those resources, I believe, the framework that includes policy, orchestration, execution, and data.
Yep.
How does that help organizations better understand what they're missing?
So end of last year, beginning of this one, I was really struggling with how to talk about the market because the names we would call functions have sort of drifted. So like what used to be, single sign-on or web access management is now access management with a bunch of things that live under it as an example. And it's hard to know what we're talking about sometimes. So I created this framework to help me better think about what capabilities do I have in sort of requisite components of my architecture? So policy, orchestration, data, and execution. What this framework allows someone to do is to say, okay, cool. I have these kinds of capabilities from a policy perspective. And so, for example, like I can create local policies around access, but I can't, for example, add contextual information. I just know about the subject and the resource I want to protect. Okay, well, good. That's what my current state is. Similarly, I know how to orchestrate workflows and provisioning, but I don't know how to orchestrate with my security infrastructure. So it's an evaluative matrix or evaluative process to understand what capabilities we have, more tightly identify what's missing, right? So an organization may say, look, I need the ability to do something really, really specific, like OpenID Foundation's financial API, the FAPI profile, because I'm doing open banking. But the OAuth infrastructure I have doesn't support that. The execution part of it doesn't support that. Cool, then I know exactly the component I need to focus on, whether I'm going to choose to build something or augment what I have, replace something. It helps narrow the focus to where's the real pain and need, and how do we then begin to address it? And so this is one of those places where that framework then says, look, I'm great at orchestrating inside of maybe my identity stack, but what I can't do really well is both take signals in a real-time way from, say, some of my security infrastructure, and I can't then send signals to different parts of my identity stack based on that. I'm just missing the ability to pick up on this important security dial tone and then take action based on it. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, now I want to go augment maybe some of the capabilities I have in orchestration, or I want to go see how I can get certain pieces of data. Maybe it's that EDR data, maybe it's that PagerDuty data, what have you. It helps sort of focus and then decide, what do I want to do at that point?
want to remind the audience that we do have a Q&A tab that you can add questions to, and we'll get to towards the end of the episode, which is unfortunately rapidly approaching. But you talked a lot. You just mentioned it, Ian. This augmentation instead of replacement. You mentioned earlier when we were talking about sort of addressing existing IAM investments. What does augmentation instead of replacement look like? How do organizations evolve their existing IAM investments instead of just saying like, well, now I have to replace it? That's the only option.
Yeah. It can take a lot of forms. The through line on this is going to be adding some combination of just a little bit of contextual insight. Doesn't have to be a lot, but a little bit of contextual insight consistently and continuously evaluated can be applied in multiple parts of your IAM infrastructure. So if it's, let's say, if we're focusing on our admin time processes, so on our IGA system, it could be like, look, I think we'd agree that if someone has an open cybersecurity incident with them or with their device, it feels like they shouldn't ask for more access. Like, it just feels like it's a bad idea to be like, by all means, sir, here's the keys to the kingdom. Like, no. Okay. Well, if we just use the tools we had, it would mean I would put up maybe an approval workflow for the individual. It would go to their manager or maybe someone in IT to swivel chair and look at the security system and be like, oh, hell no, not that guy, not that laptop. And then make a decision. Can we just automate that? Because that just feels like I'm burning cycles. Like that's just like a no-brainer. So how do I bring that information to places in like an IGA example in my approval workflows, for instance? In my sort of runtime or my IDP environments, this is one where now I've got a really great preventative control, or the possibility of one, which says I bring more kinds of information to bear. Like, oh, look, Ian wants to click on the chiclet for Azure to go do something in the compute environment. And oh, hey, you know what? There's an ITSM ticket assigned to him about a critical issue. It's open, it's active, and it's specific to this Azure instance. Great, let him on through. Otherwise, like, don't bother. Like, because he's probably not had the second cup of coffee, thinks he's clicking on stage, he clicks on prod, and will invariably push a breaking change. Because have you seen the quality of his code, especially without coffee? Like, it's those kinds of things, right? We're not even talking about, oh, I've got to defend against adversaries. I got to defend against humans, right? Like, misuse is a thing. It happens. So why don't we put some preventative controls in place to do that in our IDP? And then lastly, and to me, this is actually one of the great places to start is, let's do a reactive control, right? Let's say, look, when I do see that an individual is trending risky from a human behavioral system or in my EDR system, then why don't I immediately tell my IGA, take away his highly privileged access, and put them into a remediation group. Go tell my IDP maybe the same thing, or it'll draft off the back of that action, but also open up a ticket to help this individual get remediated, right? Help them get on a better path. And let's do that as a reactive or a detective control. So as soon as we see something happen, let's get them on a path to better. And while we're doing them the path to better, we're actually mitigating future abuse. Right? We're going to take away some of the most damaging things. We're going to put them in a bit of an isolation, but not, for example, say cut off all their access or deny them connected to the network. It's a much more nuanced approach, but it's really, really powerful. It's sort of an airbag for your IAM infrastructure for that individual. So you can have both those detective controls, like, or reactive controls that I just described when you see something happen, as well as the preventative, like, don't let them in the front door. Don't let them ask for more access when certain things happen. Take all of those things together, and you've started to build a really robust continuous identity system.
Yeah, once again, not super contentious. It makes sense. Let's say I'm an IAM leader. I want it everywhere. How do we help these IAM teams to avoid that sort of challenge that becomes like, well, I want this everywhere. What do I do? Like, it becomes this analysis paralysis.
Man, the siren song of automate everything everywhere is time immemorial, right? Like, that goes back to the provisioning days. Same kind of story. So I want this everywhere. the first question to ask is, among the outcomes that you think you can get, what is the one that is the most attractive or the most sexy to upper leadership or the most timely based on new initiatives, right? So I think it's first, focus on the outcome. What is that outcome? Like, hey, we have a real problem with work happening in critical code lines or applications or what have you, and we want more change management governance around them. That's the top level mandate, right? Like, maybe we had an incident and we've got to get better, right? We just mature our processes. That's super timely. Like, hey, identity team, you help out here? Traditionally, it's been like, maybe. Now it's like, of course we can. Of course we can do that. So focus on what that sort of timely outcome you'd like to render is. Then it's look at what is the most effective place to put that control. Some people are going to say for their use case or their outcome, they're going to say, oh, you know what? If I raise the bar to entry at my IDP by infusing these 3 pieces of context, or heck, this 1 piece of context, I'm going to materially improve the state of play. And oh, by the way, I may even have the opportunity to remove an approval process, making the individual's experience even better. Or, man, if I do this right, I bet I can get rid of a big chunk of user access reviews. That's a super big win, right? So it's what point can I put that control? And it may be in my IDP, it may be in my provisioning infrastructure. It may be actually putting a new piece of capability to do, say, CAPE, Shared Signals Framework, to then orchestrate the existing framework that you've already got to go take actions. But focus on the outcome, pick a great place to apply a control, and start super, super simple. Like, you'd be blown away by 1 piece of context, what it can do for what you've already got.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it seems like a practical approach, which is what we're about driving here at Continuous Identity Sessions. We want to talk theoretically, but really leave with some actionable steps. So as we wrap up, a couple of quick hitter questions for you, just to better understand some key components. One is, where can we find you in the real world in the next few months? Are you going to be picking up some socks at these at events, or why did socks become the most popular and creative swag tool? I'm not sure, but
I don't know. That was a thing. I had nothing to do with it. I appreciate it, but I had nothing to do with it. All right. So where am I going to be? Busy fall coming up. Super stoked to support the Women in Identity at their yearly event at Capital One in September here in the DC area. So that's gonna be great. I'll be helping to host a identity salon in London. Hope to see folks over there. I'll be at SailPoint's Navigate conference in Austin end of September. Authenticate in San Diego in October. It's October. Yeah. Identiverse is doing some regional things. I'll see people in the DC area one. And then I think the last sort of sighting is I'll be roaming the halls at Gartner IAM in Dallas. Probably. I mean, there's probably a few others that I'm forgetting, but those are like good places you can go find me.
Yeah, that's it.
Right, that's it.
Getting back to sort of summarizing our talk, if someone was watching the session and they thought, again, this is great, but I can only really do one thing. What's one thing that someone could take away from this session, from the last half hour or so, and say, I'm going to try to focus on this thing next week?
I think it's the acknowledge that we're in the middle of generational change from a post-SOX type approach, which is very batch oriented. I've only got 4 keys, press the key when I can, to there's something different, more continuous that's happening. And in that recognition, right, that an acknowledgement, then I would say, pick one piece of contextual information, just one interesting little nugget, and say, like, if I could infuse this thing into my IAM, what would it change? Could be an ITSM ticket, could be a duty roster, could be security EDR. Just pick one. Do this as a what if exercise. You'll be pretty amazed at like what, and that starts to point towards a real tangible use case that you can actually take steps on immediately.
That's great. I mean, I want as as we host these events and more are upcoming, and I want to remind people to subscribe at signal.ai for these continuous identity sessions, but we want to get back to the actual practicality and where folks can take this into their own organizations as they strategize. But final question for you, Ian, as we look to do things continuously and to evolve, what's an example of something you've done recently? It could be a skill, a hobby, something that you continuously maybe attempt. And in the interest of fair play, I'll share that not recently, however, every year I continuously try eggnog because I think I'm going to like it. For some reason, I think that during the holidays, the context has changed, to use some of it, right? But it turns out, even though I'm a year older every year, still doesn't do it for me. But I continuously go back and try again. So anything that you could share, again, it doesn't have to be something like that, but maybe something you've taken on recently.
That has a sort of Simpsons-esque, like, ow, quit it, like sort of feel to it. I think exactly. For me, this is actually not a new answer for me, is I continually try to suck less at something, right? That it's really hard when someone says, like, just get good, right? Like, I'm going to focus on excellence. I'm like, no. I'm focusing on like sucking less at things. So like most recently, I have been trying to suck less at mountain biking, and I am slowly achieving that. But that sort of mantra of like, let's just do slightly less bad today at something, to me is like a more realistic way of approaching getting really good at something. So, yeah.
I love it. Well, thank you, Ian. Thanks again. And thanks to everybody who joined us today live and on demand. I don't think we have any questions. So either we, knocked it out of the park on the first episode, or we're going to get a lot of them that we can respond to on demand from the on-demand nature. So another reminder, all these sessions are recorded and available at signal.ai and on the YouTube channel. So bang that subscribe button, both on signal.ai and on the YouTube, and you get all the details for the upcoming episodes. I mentioned before some of the resources that we have under the docs link to the right on this modal, and any tools that we mentioned or brought up, we'll follow up in the subscribe. A little teaser that next time on the continuous identity sessions, we're going to be talking with identity strategist Felix Gatkins on next Thursday, the 28th. We're going to talk more about specifically machine and non-human identities. For those of you wondering, how do we manage identities beyond just the human ones in your orbit? You'll want to join us. So join us live and then on demand. And until then, thank you again, Ian Glazer. Let's continuously work to keep making identity work better. I'm Dustin Avol. We'll see you next time on Continuous Identity Sessions.
Thanks so much, everybody.